Hello and welcome to Radio East Med's roundup of all of the geopolitical events in the Eastern Mediterranean for the month of May 2020. I am your host for this podcast, Editor-in-Chief Ertan Karpazlı, and I would like to first of all begin talking about Egypt's challenge to Turkey's foreign policy in the Eastern Mediterranean. At the start of May, Egypt led a group of countries in condemning Turkey's foreign policy in the Eastern Mediterranean and Libya, and those countries, as well as Egypt, included France, the UAE, Greece and Cyprus. Now, unlike Turkey, Egypt has made no effort to promote itself in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East as a leading power, although it has all the right ingredients to do so. Egypt has one of the strongest, if not the strongest military in the region. Thanks to the Suez Canal, which you could say is the jugular vein of the world sea trade, Egypt enjoys a lot more international support than Turkey does. Turkey, in fact, is becoming ever more isolated due to its foreign policy. Home to around a quarter of the world's Arab population, Egypt is also well positioned as an exporter of cultural and political ideology to places as far west as Morocco, to as far east as Oman, while Turkey's echo chamber is severely restricted to its own immediate surroundings. Furthermore, Egypt, a nation of over 100 million people, a significant proportion of whom are young and educated but due to economic problems are also unemployed, is in desperate need of expansion. It needs more jobs, more resources, and more investment. Otherwise it could implode. It especially needs more fertile land, but with Ethiopia saying it will begin filling a new reservoir on its side of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam along the Blue Nile in July, the little remaining fertile land Egypt has in the Nile Delta could become a desert within a few years. Yet, Egypt has avoided involvement in conflicts such as Syria, Yemen and Libya. It has opted for a more diplomatic approach with its neighbours Israel, Cyprus and Greece, whereas Turkey has been more confrontational. Egypt has succeeded in forming an axis with Cyprus and Greece in particular to condemn Turkey's policies in the Eastern Mediterranean, even though none of Turkey's moves have targeted Egypt directly. In fact, Turkey in the past has argued that deals between Cyprus, Greece and Egypt in regards to the demarcation of exclusive economic zones in the sea have cheated Egypt out of swathes of maritime territory. Even still, Egypt has rejected Turkey's objections on its behalf. When it comes to conflicts in the region, Egypt has a good reason not to get involved. Egypt does not want to take the risks Turkey has in trying to expand and wind up isolating itself, as the Nile dispute with Ethiopia is an extremely pressing issue for which Egypt will likely need US support if it is to challenge Ethiopia militarily. Egypt also has very little to gain from getting involved in such conflicts. To the contrary, it has a lot more to lose, particularly in Libya by supporting its ally Khalifa Haftar, who has irked the US by inviting the Russians into North Africa. However, by forming an axis to condemn Turkey, Egypt is doing the bidding of nations who have no qualms about getting involved in Libya, such as the UAE. The UAE, in many ways, has been acting on behalf of Saudi Arabia since Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was implicated in the 2018 murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul. This controversy made it difficult for Saudi Arabia's Western partners to work with Riyadh so openly. Both Saudi Arabia and the UAE are concerned by Turkey's growth strategy in Arab countries such as Syria and Libya, as they see it as a trespassing on their turf. Thus, Egypt, which is in desperate need of their financial assistance to keep afloat, has become a vassal of these Arab Gulf kingdoms. Egypt's stance is also an invitation for France to ally itself with an Eastern Mediterranean naval power. the only one that can really challenge Turkey's expansionist blue homeland maritime doctrine. France is equally concerned with Turkey's presence in Libya, especially considering that Turkish intervention has been greeted warmly by Tunisia, Algeria and Morocco, all former French colonies where French influence has depleted as of late. Although Haftar is working with the Russians, France realizes that Russia, being a distant state, cannot maintain a permanent military presence in Libya, and that in the long term Haftar will need a more practical ally in the region. Haftar is therefore France's opportunity to stay relevant to North Africa. The tension between Egypt and Turkey, as well as the tensions between Turkey and Greece, therefore give France the mandate to enter its ships in the eastern Mediterranean and maintain a presence close to Libya. What is interesting, however, is seeing how Israel will play into this future. There were reports in May about a possible rapprochement between Israel and Turkey, particularly regarding Syria. Many noted that Israel was absent from the countries that condemned Turkey's policy in the region earlier in May. Turkey was quick to dismiss these reports, and Cihat Yaycı, the Turkish naval commander believed to be the brains behind the deal with the UN-backed government in Libya, was demoted after allegedly pushing for such a rapprochement. He later resigned from the military in protest. Yet these rumours of a Turkish-Israeli rapprochement keep resurfacing time and time again, and are nothing new. They certainly have mutual interest in pushing pro-Iranian forces out of Syria, and may well find the need to stick together in the face of Arab states in the Middle East uniting to oppose their respective policies. If Egypt continues to round up the likes of Greece, Cyprus and France to try and in effect turn Turkey into a landlocked country barely able to set sail from its own coastline, Turkey would certainly be in need of a regional ally such as Israel to even out the power balance, just as Israel would need local support in the event that the Egyptians grow too powerful and come to see Israel as a sitting duck waiting to be taken advantage of, especially considering that the US, under President Donald Trump, is no longer interested in putting boots on the ground in the Middle East. When it comes to Turkey, its behavior in the Eastern Mediterranean in recent years can easily be interpreted as aggressive, particularly regarding issues surrounding hydrocarbon exploration in the sea. But this is also the case along the Evros River that acts as a natural border between Turkey and Greece in the Thrace region. In March, Turkey opened its borders for refugees and migrants trying to cross into Greece. Thousands amassed on the border, clashing with Greek security forces sent by Athens to confront them. Projectiles were thrown at Greek officers guarding the border, while Greek security forces fired tear gas and rubber bullets at migrants and refugees in no man's land. There were also reports of Turkish soldiers firing live ammunition into the air along the divide. On top of that, Turkish troops occupied a small island that had appeared in the river, sparking cries in Greece of a Turkish incursion. The Greek government, however, played the issue down as a disagreement having come about as a result of waters in the Evros River being unusually low, thus causing confusion over the exact perimeters of the border. The Greek government may be playing it cool, but Athens' measured reactions to what they call Turkish provocations don't necessarily reflect the atmosphere in the Greek far right. Tensions were already very high in the Aegean between locals and Athens over swelling migrant numbers before Turkey even opened its borders. Riot police were sent from the Greek mainland to suppress protests on the islands of Lesbos, Samos and Chios, where even some of the most peace-loving and welcoming of locals have become radicalized by the critical overflow of asylum seekers. The situation there acted as a magnet for neo-Nazi groups from all over Europe to come and show their solidarity with the islanders. It is in this climate that Turkey decided to open its borders. allowing even more refugees and migrants to attempt the hazardous journey to Greece. Turkish fighter jets have also been carrying out a number of overflights in the Aegean, at times allegedly breaching Greek airspace. The Turkish government and military have also expressed their concerns with Greece's increasing militarization of islands in the eastern Aegean, in violation of a previous treaty. Greece may argue this is in reaction to Turkish provocations, but it seems that the Turks are looking for an excuse to launch operations in the Aegean against Greece, and the Greek authorities in Athens certainly know it. On the whole, the Greek government has done well to raise its objections diplomatically. They are well aware that any military confrontation with Turkey in the Aegean will not play out well for them. Nevertheless, Turkey keeps nudging Greece in the direction of confrontation. Turkey's deal with the UN-backed Libyan government at the end of last year saw Ankara sign a maritime demarcation agreement with Tripoli that Athens says infringes on its own exclusive economic zone off the island of Crete. Greece calls the deal illegal and illegitimate, and is not alone in doing so, having elicited the likes of France and the EU in condemning Turkey. Greek objections to the deal have fallen on deaf ears in Turkey. To the contrary, Turkey has already proceeded on plans to start exploring and drilling in the region for gas, often making last-minute Navtex announcements in international waters in the area. Turkey is pretty much telling Greece, stop me if you dare, stop me if you can. There is of course always the concern that if the Greek state does not meet Turkey's actions in the region with brute force, other radicalized non-state actors may take on the responsibility. There will certainly be voices coming from the right-wing elements in the Greek military pressuring the government to act. And with the Turkish government approving Quran recitations in the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, the Greek Orthodox Church may begin to exert its own pressure on the government as well. Far-right Greek groups such as the Golden Dawn Party are already at the ready to respond to such provocations. On June the 1st, a mosque in southern Cyprus was spray-painted with Islamophobic, xenophobic graffiti. In such cases, the immediate suspects are usually Golden Dawn's sister party in Cyprus, Elam. Such acts of vandalism and even physical attacks against Turks and Muslims may become increasingly common in Greece and in Cyprus. For Turkey, this would present an opportunity they'd be foolish to miss. It would give them a mandate to engage in the region militarily. Based on physical strength alone, Turkey would certainly have the advantage. But we must also keep in mind that Turkey is at a crucial point in its evolution as a state. As it stands, Turkey is on the cusp of a major economic crisis that could wreak havoc on its society. The cracks are already beginning to appear, and everything the ruling AK Party has done over the period of 2 decades to unite the country is already coming undone. Turkey right now is as united as it's ever going to be, but every passing day it is getting weaker. Likewise, Turkey's rivals in the region are right now disunited and squabbling over petty differences. The longer Turkey waits, however, the more the likelihood those rivals will learn to work together. Either Turkey brings the confrontation to them now, or not too long from now, they will bring the confrontation to Turkey. Turkey no longer has the luxury to give concessions in return for foreign investments. It seeks to become more self-sufficient and take control over its own destiny. To do that, it needs more resources. Those resources happen to be found in disputed waters, and in order to lay claim to them, it needs a war. Attack is its only defense, but any attack needs to be made to look like a defense. That's why Turkey needs Greece to make the first move, but with the current Greek government, that's unlikely to happen. The conflict in Libya continues to dominate headlines as it has done for much of 2020, especially since Turkey sent its troops to bolster the besieged UN-backed government in the capital Tripoli. Before the Turkish intervention, the GNA in Tripoli were on the verge of collapse in the face of an onslaught led by renegade commander Khalifa Haftar, whose LNA forces fight on behalf of the eastern-based rival government in Tobruk. Turkish forces, backed by allied Syrian mercenaries recruited from Turkish-controlled parts of northern Syria, helped prevent the fall of Mitiga International Airport to Haftar's men, who themselves were backed by Russian mercenaries. The Russians also brought their own mercenaries from Syria, while the UAE funded mercenaries from places like Sudan to enter the war in support of Haftar. Haftar also attracted support from the likes of France, which has grown increasingly concerned with its depleting influence in North Africa, leaving behind the void for Turkish influence to grow. Greece has also offered its backing to Haftar, as the deal signed between Turkey and Libya's UN-backed government includes a maritime demarcation agreement between the two countries, which Greece says violates its own maritime territory. Yet, despite having all this support, Haftar's forces were unable to complete the operation to capture Tripoli. To the contrary, the LNA are now retreating after suffering a series of defeats. Since the GNA announced a counterattack weeks ago, the UN-backed government has seized a number of coastal towns north of Tripoli. The biggest game changer, however, has been the capture of the Al-Watiya airbase south of Tripoli. Without the airbase, Haftar's forces are unable to provide much-needed air cover for their militias fighting on the ground. Following the loss of the airbase, reports came out that pro-Haftar Russian mercenaries had started leaving Libya. As Haftar's forces started to retreat, the UN-backed government took control of the out-of-service Tripoli International Airport before finally securing Tripoli's parameters by taking over the town of Tarhuna, Haftar's last stronghold in the west of the country. But as was mentioned in Radio EastMed's previous podcast on Libya, there are no expectations of any further eastward advance by the GNA's forces towards Benghazi and Tobruk. If there is to be any further attacks on the LNA, it is likely to be in the south, across Libya's sparsely populated desert. Any advance there is likely to be quick, as it will be met with little resistance. It would also give the GNA the leverage of controlling the most territory in Libya. However, any moves towards Benghazi and Tobruk is likely to face fierce resistance and will escalate the war further. Russia and Turkey, who are now the new overlords of this war, will make sure this doesn't happen. Shortly after the fall of the Al-Watiya airbase, a number of Russian fighter jets were reportedly flown into Libya from the Russian airbase in Syria. This led to some reports that Russia was preparing to directly engage with Turkish troops in Libya. NATO was particularly alarmed by this development. For NATO, it's bad enough they couldn't evict Russia from the Mediterranean by ousting Moscow's ally Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Russia instead used the war in Syria as an opportunity to boost its presence in the region. Now the conflict in Libya has also brought Russia's presence to the south of the Mediterranean, directly opposite Europe. One could argue that Russia is filling a power vacuum left behind by the US, which under President Donald Trump has shown little interest in getting involved in conflicts in the Middle East. Yet even still, the US has its limits regarding how far it's willing to allow the Russians to go. The US may have accepted the Russians have earned their spot in the Middle East, but will not accept any westward expansion towards the Atlantic and is reportedly in the process of sending troops to Tunisia. Turkey's presence in western Libya, therefore, is expected to receive NATO backing, seeing as Turkey is a NATO member. At the same time, although Turkey's intervention served as a pretext for Russia to enter the Libyan war in the first place, the overall success of Turkish-Russian cooperation in de-escalating the conflict in Syria will be taken as a model for what we can expect in Libya. The two countries may appear to be on opposing sides, but they are actually bouncing off one another. They have created a quote-unquote Libya problem by dividing the country into two evenly matched entities locked in a frozen conflict. Each side now depends on their respected backer to remain in Libya to maintain a set power balance. Neither Turkey nor Russia are interested in controlling all of Libya or uniting Libya. They are only interested in creating a situation that allows them to get a foothold in North Africa. They are helping each other in that respect, and Turkey is particularly confident it will get the international support it needs to implement its deals with the UN-backed Libyan government, as Western countries will recognize that Turkey is the only NATO country willing to share a front line with the Russians. This will naturally put huge pressure on France and Greece, who along with Russia have backed Haftar. France's ties with NATO are already strained, with French President Emmanuel Macron making no secret of his preference for an EU army over a transatlantic alliance. France has, as of late, used its reputation as a champion of Europeanism to get involved in the Eastern Mediterranean with the intention of warding off Turkish ships from drilling off contested waters around Greece. What France is actually doing there, however, is trying to cut off Turkey's sea routes to Libya in order to protect its own interests there. Yet France does this under the jealous watch of Italy, which long ago earmarked Libya as its own back garden, but couldn't make itself relevant during the present-day conflict due to its bad treatment of Libyans in colonial days. France wants Turkey out of Libya, primarily because Turkey's influence is growing in neighboring Algeria, but ousting Turkey may open the door for Russia to expand even more. France is also struggling to find its voice in the Eastern Mediterranean, and largely depends on good ties with Cyprus, Greece, and Egypt to sail its ships in the region comfortably. If it is to go its own way from NATO, France depends on this regional alliance and must therefore show itself as supporting Greece on this issue. However, Greece may find its own allegiances tested if Turkey gets NATO's backing in Libya. It would mean having to step back and watch Turkey usurp a swathe of sea territory that Athens argues belongs to Greece. This could push the Greeks further away from the Western Bloc and towards Russia. On the other hand, it may force the Greeks to sit down and negotiate with the Turks on the maritime demarcation of the Aegean. My prediction is that neither will happen. Greece will be too proud to give concessions to Turkey, and will continue to raise its protests to NATO, the EU, and the UN. These international bodies will outwardly condemn Turkey, if only to keep Greece on their side, but will do nothing to remove Turkey from Libya. Turkey, meanwhile, will lay claim to the disputed waters off Crete, but will make no moves to put its standing with NATO at risk. What will follow is a stalemate on all sides, with Turkey ensuring for itself safety from a naval blockade in the Eastern Mediterranean. After years of talk from the Israeli side, the time seems to have finally arrived to see if Israel has the courage to actually annex the West Bank. If it does, it will be the biggest grab of Palestinian land since the Six-Day War in 1967. Of course, the West Bank has been under Israeli occupation since then, and illegal Jewish settlers continue to build settlements on the territory, boosting their demographic number and disenfranchising the Palestinian locals. The annexation would merely formalize the status quo of the last 53 years, placing everything between the already annexed East Jerusalem and the western side of the Jordan Valley under Israeli sovereignty, minus a few Palestinian enclaves. Israel already has the backing of US President Donald Trump to make this move. Trump has already moved the US Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, officially recognizing the contested city as Israel's capital, and pushing Palestinian aims of having East Jerusalem as the capital of an independent Palestinian state that much further away. The annexation of the West Bank is also the brainchild of President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Their plan offers the Palestinian sovereignty under a two-state solution, with the Palestinian enclaves in the West Bank being connected with the Gaza Strip via a tunnel passing through Israel. The plan, however, was drawn up without any consultation with the Palestinians, who have on the whole rejected it, saying it defies the 1995 Oslo Accords. But for some time there were doubts that Netanyahu would be able to implement the plan. He just barely survived an election to remain the Prime Minister of Israel after reaching an agreement with his election rival Benny Gantz, who is now Israel's new defense minister. Gantz's supporters largely opposed the annexation, fearing it could trigger another Palestinian intifada, or an uprising. It seems that Gantz has promised to back the annexation in return for his bloc taking greater control of Israel's judiciary. Even still, the Israeli Prime Minister is currently on trial for corruption and bribery, and it is unclear whether Netanyahu will even be able to complete his current term should he be sentenced to time in prison. Nonetheless, Gantz himself has instructed the Israeli military to be on standby for the annexation. World reaction to the plan has been mixed. Some Arab countries have advised the Palestinians to consider the proposals while at the same time urging Israel to hold off any unilateral moves. Turkey, meanwhile, has completely rejected the plan. Even the EU has desperately appealed to Israel to not go ahead with it. A number of EU countries actually recognize the state of Palestine, so the annexation could cause issues within the EU bloc. But none has been more outspoken than Jordan, a relatively quiet country to the east of Israel. Jordan's King Abdullah warned of a massive conflict in the Middle East should the annexation go ahead, stopping short of saying whether the move would nullify Jordan's own peace treaty with Israel. On the whole, Jordan has done well to maintain a degree of stability in a highly volatile region, but thanks to its geography, it is always doomed to feel the ramifications of any nearby escalation. It is naturally concerned with the collapse of the Palestinian Authority, and it is fearful that this will lead to lawlessness and extremism among Palestinians in the West Bank. And any conflict could send waves of refugees into Jordan, placing a further strain on its economy. Keep in mind the majority of people living in Jordan are already refugees from Palestine. But for Israel, there is a notion of annexation happening now or never. Israel's main opponent in the region since the 1970s has been Iran. For decades, Iran has been working its way to the Mediterranean by setting up allied regimes, proxies, and militia groups, mainly recruited from Shia Muslim minorities in Syria and Lebanon. The Iranians helped establish Hezbollah, a Shia-dominated party in Lebanon with its own militia army, which effectively fought against Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon in the past. Hezbollah has remained a pain in the neck of Israel ever since. The group has grown into more of a threat since entering the Syrian civil war on behalf of the Alawite-led regime headed by Bashar al-Assad. Throughout the war, Hezbollah has often taunted Israel near the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. However, since the assassination of Iranian Quds Force commander Qasem Soleimani in January, Iran and its proxies have been on the back foot in the region, with some reports suggesting Iranian military personnel were preparing to pull out of Syria. Iran's retreat would also spell bad news for some Iranian-backed Palestinian militias such as Islamic Jihad. And while the Turkish and Qatari-backed Hamas government in Gaza won't stand for the annexation, without Iranian support it is unlikely to mobilize any kind of resistance against Israel. Unlike Iran, Turkey has diplomatic ties with Israel, albeit strained. And according to reports earlier this year, the Israeli government has held secret contacts with Qatar regarding maintaining stability in Gaza. Turkey will also particularly be pleased to see Iranian fighters withdraw from Syria and the collapse of the Assad regime, for which Russia is rumored to be preparing a suitable replacement. Nonetheless, Israel is highly unlikely to get any support beyond the US and perhaps India for the annexation of the West Bank. The international community will condemn it and deem it illegal. But that didn't stop Israel from annexing East Jerusalem in the past, and the sad reality for Palestinians is that it probably won't stop Israel from doing it again. Turkey will push for the Palestinian agenda on the world stage, but it will not go to war over it. The Arab world will outwardly disagree with it, but inwardly be relieved at Israel's success against Iran. Voices within the EU will criticize the move, but they will be challenged by equally loud voices who approve of it. The fact is that Israel has never been interested in a two-state solution that leaves all of the West Bank under Palestinian control. Such a solution could never satisfy Israel's security demand. Israel needs the Jordan Valley to serve as a natural border between itself and the Arab world. With its current borders, not including the territories under its illegal occupation, Israel is extremely vulnerable. 72 years since its establishment, the power of the so-called Jewish state still doesn't even feel its own borders. Let's not forget that some 20% of Israeli citizens are actually Palestinians with deep loyalties to Palestine. Even the Jews in Israel, despite being empowered by the state, are within themselves deeply divided along sectarian and political lines. Therefore, Israel has no choice but to pursue an aggressive, maximalist policy regarding its state security. Yes, there will be skirmishes, but nothing more. Annexation will become the new normal, but at least after that, any dialogue between the Israelis and Palestinians is more likely to be based on openness and honesty, not trickery. Thank you very much for listening for Radio East Med's roundup of all of the latest geopolitical events and developments in the Eastern Mediterranean for the month of May 2020. I have been your host, Radio East Med's Editor-in-Chief Ertan Karpazlı, and I hope that you all join me again for next month's round of podcasts. Thank you very much.